Smoke slammed against the canopy, thick and gray, copper and burned plastic clawing at his lungs. Red alarms strobed out of rhythm, more fever than warning. Hydraulic fluid bled in slow, syrupy threads from a ruptured line above, soaking the slum-made pilot suit his mother had once stitched tighter at the seams. It stuck to him, cold and slick against his ribs, as if the iron vulture itself were bleeding out around him while the mandate watched. He could not feel his legs. His fingers still moved, but barely, shaking over cracked switches and blackened toggles. Each breath tore at the back of his throat. The cockpit's air recyclers wheezed like a dying animal, dragging in smoke and spitting it back almost as poisonous, like everything the mandate ever handed Sector 4. Outside, through the cracked canopy, a golden shadow moved towards him like it owned the world. Kalen Voss's mech strode out of the haze with the calm precision of a beast that had never tasted rust. Elias thought of the Targian mech God Engine, hulking, ceremonial, but Kalen's was trimmed, precise, and clearly a cut above those mechs he knew. Its weapons were straightforward and lethal. Twin sabers at the hips for close work, and a forearm-mounted pulse projector for shooting at range. The saber's low vibration crawled through the hull into Elias's bones. The Iron Vulture's forward display flickered, spat static, then steadied long enough to outline the Mandate Elite unit closing in. The feed jerked with every dying shudder of his mech. Data readouts spewed garbage. Half his sensors were blind, the other half delirious. On the open comms, laughter crackled. "Sector 4 scrap is about to fold," one proctor said, voice blurred by cheap filters and boredom. "Told you Voss would take this one in under 6 minutes. "Less," another replied. "Look at those vitals. Rustborn's about to faint." Somewhere above the arena, in a sealed observation plate of white and glass, officers and candidates watched like they were running a training sim, not a fight. To them, this was a clean lesson in class and inevitability. Rustborn bodies break, mandate mechs don't. Elias's hand slipped off the throttle. His skin buzzed and crawled, too loose on his bones. His heartbeat stuttered between too loud and too soft. A high-pitched whine drilled through the cockpit. He couldn't tell if it came from the failing engine or from inside his skull. "Move," he ordered himself. His legs didn't answer. From the waist down he was dead weight, distant and underwater. His vision thickened at the edges, black creeping in like oil through cloth. The Iron Vulture's chest plate had caved where Voss's last strike landed. Warning glyphs bloomed crimson over that section of the schematic, and over all of it his mind threw up Mira's face, sharper and more real than the broken metal. He saw her as she'd been 2 weeks ago, perched on the cracked window ledge of their Sector 4 crate home, wrapped in a gray blanket patched too many times to count. The permanent haze outside turned everything sepia, but her eyes had stayed bright and angry as the cough kept ripping pieces out of her chest. Every hack sounded like it was sandblasting her away, while the mandate tallied quotas. "Just don't die," she'd whispered, when she thought he wasn't listening. "You can't die before me. That would be cheating." His father's ghost leaned out of the dark corners of his memory, eyes ash-gray, scar on his cheek like a crack through stone. The story the sectors still spat out. Rustborn fool who reached too high, who lost control of his mech in trial, and punched a crater in the arena wall, crest down on Elias now, heavier than the dead weight of his legs. "Not you," he thought. "Not like you. I can't." The gold mech's external speakers clicked on, Kalen Voss's voice pouring through the Iron Vulture's battered hull in smooth, academy-polished mandate standard. "Thorn," he said, almost gently, as if delivering a courtesy in a duel rather than a final warning. "You've done well for what you are. Yield now. There's no protocol glory in letting this drag out." Elias swallowed against a throat lined with rust. Metal coated his tongue, chased by some faint bitter sweetness he couldn't name. He tried to answer, but the comms only hissed. The last overload had fried them. Maybe that was mercy. His voice wouldn't have sounded like a pilot's, just another sector rat choking on smoke. Outside, Voss's mech raised one golden saber in an easy, almost lazy arc, the casual threat of someone who had never once been told no. The crowd beyond the arena walls roared, rustborn and slum-bred voices rising up from the cheap seats near the ground, smoother, higher mandate accents layering over them from the elevate platforms. In the roar, Elias heard more than the crowd. Mira's cough threaded through the chants and static. His mother stirring a pot of thin synth stew, pretending not to listen to the arena feed. His father's voice, muttering at a broken console, "The machine isn't metal, it's the space between your pulse and its hum." The mandate called it training. His family knew it was execution by slow degrees. His own pulse stumbled. Somewhere inside his chest, below the sternum and left of his thudding heart, the black shard under his skin began to ache. Not a sharp pain, the opposite. The dense, spreading coolness pushing against the tight heat, threatening to suffocate him. It pressed outward, as if something very small inside him remembered it was much larger. Elias tried to drag in another breath, and it snagged halfway. Time snagged with it. The red alarms froze mid-blink. For one narrow, impossible instant, nothing moved. Then pressure hit. It was not the force of Voss's mech, not the impact of external metal on hull. It pushed from within the Iron Vulture's chest, as if the old patched plates had grown a heart that did not like its cage. Something pulsed. Once, a low subterranean thrum, like distant thunder rolling through metal bones. Twice, harder, a deep drum behind reality itself, making the cockpit walls tremble and the dangling scrap charms on the main console jangle as if in wind. On the third pulse, the obsidian shard under Elias's clavicle liquefied. He felt it without seeing it, as clearly as he'd ever felt a cut or a bruise. Grain by grain, the hard sliver melted into something fluid and impossibly cold. Seeping into the channels the mandate implants had threaded through his nerves when they turned him into a pilot. The shard ignored the neat pathways they had drilled and carved its own. Black oil-dark strands slid outward from his skin into the pilot harness. They spread like ink through water, moving along the old, frayed fiber cables, swallowing light. Where they passed, dead indicator lights burned weakly back to life. Not quite the same color as before. Some glowed a deep blue-black. Others pulsed faintly like embers that remembered being stars. In the Iron Vulture's chest, behind scorched armor and beneath mandate standard reactor coils, something impossible seeped into the lattice of machinery. Metal that had spent years knowing it was scrap, remembered, for a moment, that it had once been ore at the bottom of the world, pressed and dreaming. Within the harness, the tendrils found the neural ports at the base of Elias's skull and along his spine. Pain came first. Then, pain hit like detonation. Every nerve went white-hot. It felt like being flayed from the inside. Molten wire poured into veins that had only ever carried blood. He arched against the straps, teeth clamped so hard he tasted iron. The scream that would have clawed its way out dissipated instead into static that fizzled across the helmet's inside. Then, as quickly as the fire rushed in, it flickered. The pain rolled backward, cooling as it went. Properly cooling, like ice laid along the cooking iron of his spine, like the first clean inhale of air after years of smog. His nerves did not numb, they sharpened. He tasted the cockpit, not metaphorically. He knew the sour of burning insulation, the slightly sweet tang of leaking coolant, the mineral heaviness of iron filings ground under his boots. He heard every alarm as a distinct note, each with its own cadence and pitch, no longer a chaotic wall of noise, but a discordant orchestra tuning before a performance. Beyond the hull, a different music unfolded. The drainage pumps that kept the arena's foundations from flooding produced a bass rumble, steady and distant. The crowd's roar separated into single threads, a boy shrieking Elias's name until his voice broke, a woman bargaining with any power listening that this rust-born stranger would survive so that hers might too. A mandate cadet complaining softly that this was taking too long, that he was hungry. Above it all, the god engines. Their presence had always been an abstract terror, a word thrown around with taxes and conscription. Now he heard them clearly. Massive reactors thrumming high in the bruised sky, old and patient, their hums sinking through atmosphere and structure and bone. Within that hum was something older, another rhythm, older than mechs, older than mandate edicts and rust. The world thickened, then stretched. The golden mech saber began to fall. It did not swing. Falling seemed more accurate, because Elias watched each incremental shift as if someone had slowed the universe down to study the arc. Voss's mech joints rotated degree by measured degree. Dust motes spiraled lazily through the air, each grain tracing its own narrow spiral of gravity and stubbornness. Drops of hydraulic fluid, drifting from the broken pipe above him, hung suspended, perfect beads midair. His fear thinned. It stayed, a hard shard in his chest, but it stopped blinding him. Something bigger rose up beside it. A dangerous, treacherous wonder. Like the first time he'd looked up through the smog and seen, faintly, an orbital station cutting across the filthy light. Proof that something cleaner existed, and that it wanted nothing to do with him. He exhaled fully, his breath leaving in a slow, deliberate stream. The obsidian that had invaded his nerves thrummed quietly, the same way the god engines did. The same way the metal in the Iron Vulture's bones had started to. In the space between all these sounds there was a pulse. Not his, not the mandate's. A third thing, patient and steady, aligning. The cockpit stopped feeling like a coffin. It felt like the inside of a chest that had just remembered how to breathe. He understood then, without words, that the mech was not outside him. The Iron Vulture's failing systems, the micro-cracks in its left knee, the overheating capacitors near the hip joint, the hairline fractures spiderwebbing through the canopy glass. He perceived them the way he would notice an ache in his own wrist or a sting on his lip. His thoughts drifted down his arms and out, along cables made of both metal and something else. He found the rusted actuator in the right ankle and the misaligned servo in the shoulder joint. Each one lit in his awareness, like a point on a constellation he'd always known by heart, but forgotten the name of. The golden saber drew closer, singing through air thick as syrup. Elias's panic didn't vanish. Something larger swallowed it. The calm that came wasn't kind. It was the stillness at the center of an impact, the second before shrapnel chooses a direction. The world had offered him a dance, and made it clear he didn't get to refuse. The primal rhythm, those old mandate legends whispered to cadets as myths at lights out, had always sounded like superstition. Now it flowed through the narrow space between his heartbeat and the Iron Vulture's hum, revealing where one ended and the other began, and then erasing that border altogether. Move, the rhythm said, not in words, but in the way a river suggests paths to a stone. Voss's mech committed to the strike. In the proctor's booth, 2 evaluators leaned forward as one. One of them, older, with data scars etched around her temples, frowned at the fluctuating telemetry streaming in from the Restworld unit. Spikes of unknown energy signatures crawled across the graph, like an infection. "What is that?" she murmured, more to herself than to the cluster of junior analysts at her side. The junior analysts had no answer. Their screens had turned to static on one whole quadrant, the feed from Elias Thorne's Iron Vulture, replaced by a fuzzy smear of blue-black interference. Down in the arena, only Voss saw the battered mech begin to move. Trying to dodge? Too late, he said under his breath, a habit carried over from dueling sims. His own systems tracked the projected evasion paths, neat predictive lines curving away from the downward arc of his saber. The Academy algorithms had never anticipated deviation beyond those parameters. Rust-born pilots didn't improvise. They scrambled and failed. He swung. Inside the cockpit that no longer ended at his skin, Elias reached for the familiar controls and found that they were only one way of touching the machine. His hands still flew, flicking toggles in a blur faster than they had ever answered him before. Fingers that had always been just slightly too slow in the Mandate Sims now anticipated each lever before his conscious mind finished deciding. The obsidian woven into his nerves carried intent like current. His movements no longer needed to fight through the viscous fear that had always lived in his muscles. The Iron Vulture's stabilizers shuddered awake with a hoarse growl. Twin jets under the hip plates coughed, then belched short, jagged bursts of thrust. Somewhere in the left leg, a long mute actuator answered with a protesting screech as power surged along a path it hadn't traveled in years. He did not step sideways. He stepped out. From the cheap seats and polished platforms, it just looked like the Iron Vulture vanished between one breath and the next, its outline sliding sideways through an invisible seam. No dramatic crack in the floor, no showy flare, just gone. Inside the mech, Elias felt space fold like wet cloth. Just for an instant, the cockpit widened. The sense of his body stretched, as if his fingertips brushed not only the control rods, but the very edges of the arena. The Iron Vulture's bulk became weightless, its rust and patched armor irrelevant. Around him, the familiar dimensions, forward, back, left, right, tilted. The air tasted strange in that not place, like old ozone and something sweeter, a hint of starlight remembered. Blue-black lines, so fine they were almost not lines but possibilities, flickered through his vision. He chose one without understanding how. The saber cleaved through the place where the Iron Vulture had been, leaving only a rippling afterimage. It was as if a shadow had lagged behind its owner. For a heartbeat, Elias's mech hung there as a translucent echo, vibrating at the edge of sight. The blade passed through the ghost without resistance, shredding static and a spray of phantom sparks that fell upward instead of down. The impact that should have come, metal shearing, hull collapsing, never arrived. The Iron Vulture snapped back into being several meters to the right, tight against Voss's flank, close enough that its arms scraped the golden mech's gleaming hip plate. The return to solidity slammed into Elias like a slap. Gravity snapped onto him again, a harsh hand. The cockpit shrank back down around his shoulders and knees. The sudden weight made the joints of the battered mech protest, servos whining, rivets groaning. Energy, whatever strange thing had carried them through that short absence, shuddered out of the frame in a visible ripple. Blue-black lattices, thin as veins, crawled across the Iron Vulture's armor. At first they could have passed for tricks of the floodlights, lines of darker shadow over rust. Then they lit once, brief and cold, like ink catching fire. In the observation rings, monitors sparked. 3 holoscreens exploded into showers of projected glass, image matrices shattering, raining down illusory shards that vanished before hitting the floor. Engineers cursed, ripping off Neuralink headsets. Someone yanked a data cable from a port so hard that sparks spit and the port housing snapped. "Did you see that?" one shouted. "He tripped a short-range fold. That's impossible. The core can't." "Shut down his feed," another barked. "Now." In the proctor's booth, the older evaluator's lips pressed thin. On her overview, the arena telemetry warped around the patch of space the Iron Vulture had just vacated. Residual readings pulsed like a bruise in the data. "Artifact resonance," she said, very softly. Kalen Voss knew none of the technical readings, but his body understood wrongness when it hit him. Momentum carried his saber through open air, leaving him grotesquely overextended. His mech's balance algorithms stuttered, recalibrating to a situation they had not been programmed for. Predictive iconography on his HUD spun, then blanked. For a half-second he moved blind. A warning pinged in his right auditory channel. An object, large, heavy, furious, had materialized almost inside his guard. What? He did not finish. The Iron Vulture's right arm swung in a motion that should have looked clumsy under all that patched plating. It didn't. Driven by the new rhythm running through Elias's bones, the battered limb punched through the narrow gap between Voss's golden shoulder joint and upper arm, smashing straight into the sensor array housing beneath the pretty gilding. Through the shared physics of their mech's shells, the blow resounded in both cockpits. Voss heard a muted, sick crunch, the sound of precision parts forced out of alignment. Damage glyphs bloomed along his right side, yellow then red. "How?" he hissed, fingers flying to compensate, to bring his second saber around in a backhand sweep that would sever the rustborn mech's head from its chassis. He had spent years training to improvise, to dominate, to recover from the unexpected with crushing superiority. His instructors had praised his ability to adapt in combat sims, to turn even minor missteps from others into catastrophes. That muscle memory engaged automatically now. But Elias no longer moved inside the predictable geometry of Academy doctrine. Obsidian wove through his perceptions, marking Voss's mech in delicate lines of failure. Tiny stress fissures, hidden beneath perfect gold plating, brightened in his awareness. The left elbow servo running just a hair too hot from earlier overuse. The micro delay in the targeting feed to the thoracic tannin. The slightly heavier weight distribution on the right ankle, where some engineer had favored aesthetics over balance. It was like watching someone play an instrument he had secretly studied for years, finally seeing the exact fingers where notes could be changed. The second saber swept in. The primal rhythm showed him 3 ways to die in that movement. It also unveiled one narrow, fluid curve through space where death did not live. Elias took it. The Iron Vulture dipped, not back, not forward, but along a slant that wasted no motion. Rusted joints that had creaked under simple steps, now folded and stretched in strained harmony, every actuator lending itself to the path. The golden blade hissed overhead, shearing off one of the scrap charms dangling from Elias's console. His father's bent metal token spun away, tumbling, catching briefly in the canopy fissure before dropping into the dust outside. The loss registered in some far-off room of Elias's heart, but the rhythm did not allow him to dwell. He rolled the momentum of the dodge into a pivot, letting the Iron Vulture's left foot drag half a beat longer than protocol would dictate. That lag drew Voss's tracking sensors just off true. As his rival's targeting matrix corrected, Elias slid his mech's right knee sideways and drove it into the joint cluster at the base of the golden mech's leg. Metal met metal in a blow as intimate as a knee to the ribs in a street fight. Voss's mech shuddered. A burst of static flared across his HUD. His targeting sabers flickered, then dimmed. Stabilizers compromised, an AI subroutine intoned blandly in his ear. Voss's jaw tightened. Compensate, full manual. His voice cut off as another impact slammed through the cockpit. The Iron Vulture had not retreated. Instead, Elias kept them close, too close for Voss to bring his full blade arcs to bear. He had learned in Sector 4's alleys that the rich hated being smothered. Now he applied that lesson with a mech. He drove the Iron Vulture's shoulder into the golden mech's chest, angling the blow just so, a half-degree higher than center mass, to scrape across the primary armor and catch on the sensor ridge beneath. The battered frame screamed with the effort, but the obsidian crawling through its structure acted like unseen bracing, distributing force where raw metal would have splintered. Sparks fountained from the impact, not the clean, choreographed glitter of Mandate show combats, but wild, ugly bursts, each spark taking its own stubborn path through the air. On the stands, the Rustborn watchers fell silent first. They knew the sound of something that should have broken but didn't. It shared a family with the groan of a support beam that refused to collapse during a workshift cave-in, or the cough of an engine that turned over one more time than it had any right to. A small boy in a patched coat, eyes too big for his thin face, squeezed his mother's hand and whispered, "He's singing with it." No one corrected him. In the upper tiers, a Mandate cadet scoffed, too loudly. "More luck than skill. Voss will." His companion elbowed him hard. "Shut up and look." Below, Elias did not hear them. He heard the Iron Vulture. With every hit, the Iron Vulture shouted back at him. Each jolt sent him not just noise, but information. Loose bolts, flexing plates, welds that would hold if he asked instead of ordered. He started shaping his blows not only to rip into Voss, but to keep his own wounded mech from tearing itself apart. He targeted the golden mech's weaknesses in a sequence that felt less like attack and more like unweaving a knot. First, the right arm. He feinted low toward the hip joint, then snapped upward at the last second, Iron Vulture's forearm slamming into the narrow seam under the ornate shoulder ornament. It was a decadent flourish of design, never intended to be a liability. In that instant, it became one. The impact jarred Voss in his harness. His right saber jutted, dropped a few centimeters. Elias seized the opening, bringing the Iron Vulture's rusted left hand down like a hammer on the exposed joint. Metal cracked. In the observation booth, someone swore. On one of the few remaining operational holoscreens, Voss's right arm readout cascaded into red. Targeting Array 3 offline, servo chain degraded, weapon linkage severed. The golden mech's right saber flickered, then died. It hung limp at its side, a dull ornament instead of a weapon. Elias did not cheer. The rhythm did not contain space for victory yet. It showed more threads to pull. Next, the eyes. Not the cameras, but what made those cameras dangerous. The targeting core buried under the ornate chest sigil. Not the mech's literal cameras, but the systems that made those cameras lethal. Voss fell back a step, trying to take distance, to reset, to bring his remaining saber and thoracic cannon to bear. Academy dueling doctrine that had always served him well whispered its practiced commands. Establish range, reacquire lock, punish. The Iron Vulture refused to give range. Elias drove forward with a lurching step that should have toppled him. It didn't. The obsidian braced the failing stabilizer at the last moment, sending a pulse of cold through the mech's left hip. His own left hip ached in sympathy, but his balance held. He lifted the Iron Vulture's hand, fingers curled into a rough approximation of a fist, and slammed it into the center of Voss's chest plate. Once, twice. On the third strike, he twisted his mech's wrist 3 degrees clockwise at the moment of impact. It was a minute adjustment, the kind his father had once muttered about when explaining how to loosen a stuck bolt without snapping it. The chest sigil, the sunburst emblem of Mandate ascendance, buckled inward, just enough to crunch the delicate core beneath. Voss's targeting overlays went dark. Primary lock array disabled, the AI said, voice still maddeningly calm. His vision of the Iron Vulture dissolved into raw shapes and edges, no longer highlighted in helpful red brackets. For the first time in his carefully curated career, he fought not as the elite of the Mandate, but as something closer to the boy he had been before the Academy grafted its tools over his psyche. Rage flared in him, hot and immediate. "You rust-born little..." His insult broke on another impact. Elias pivoted, letting the rhythm spin him around Voss's bulk. Each movement felt as if the Iron Vulture whispered suggestions into his bones, small course corrections. He listened. He had spent most of his life being told what to do. This felt different. The commands came not from above, but from inside the bone-deep harmony that had formed between him and the old machine. They moved together, and the arena floor did not feel entirely solid beneath them. Space seemed slightly more permissive now, its strict lines softened by whatever they had stepped through. He struck the thruster pack on Voss's back, not with a wild swing, but with a series of small, precise jabs. Each one targeted a seam, a vent, a fastening bolt. Dents accumulated in a deliberate pattern, like someone hammering the outline of a doorway into a wall. On the final blow, something inside the golden mech's spine gave way. Flame burst not outward, as spectacular as the crowd might have expected, but inward, systems overloaded in a chain, energy redirecting along paths that could not hold it. Voss's mech lurched. The blue-white flare of his thrusters sputtered, coughed, then died. Weight claimed him. The golden unit sagged noticeably, its graceful, terrible lightness gone. Without thruster assistance, its every step would be a dragged labor. In the lower ranks of the stands, a seasoned mechanic from Sector 3 nodded once, straight-backed, as if some quiet theorem had just been proven. "See?" he muttered to the girl next to him, who was biting her knuckle until it bled. "Take away a Mandate's legs and eyes, and all they've got left is voice. Voice doesn't move metal." The girl said nothing, but her gaze burned. Sweat ran down his temple and stung his eye. The obsidian cool inside him didn't erase the strain, it sharpened it. Exhaustion and power both burned hot. His heart pounded like it was working for two bodies, his and the Iron Vulture's failing actuators. Heat pressed in from the cockpit, fighting with the chill of that other place still clinging to his nerves. He could feel the rhythm starting to fray around the edges. It pulsed less steadily, as if asking him to choose an ending. Voss's mech dropped to one knee, plates grinding. The remaining saber dragged furrows in the arena floor. Inside his cockpit, Kalen Voss stared at blinking error glyphs that for once did not scare him. They insulted him. This was not how things went. He was the prodigy, the inevitable sovereign. He had trained under the best, fought the most advanced sims, crushed every opponent. Losing to Sector 4 scrap didn't just hurt. It rewrote him. Pure, bright fury overwhelmed his earlier composure. "Enough," he snarled, slamming his hand down on a recessed control that most cadets were advised never to touch outside supervised trials. A warning sigil flared. Overburn initiation. "Kalen, don't!" A distant instructor's voice crackled over his private link, several seconds too late. The golden mech's remaining systems flared as he poured raw, unstable power into them. Servos screamed. The left arm snapped up with jerky speed, saber igniting once more, burning so hot its aura went almost colorless. He lashed out in a wild, horizontal cleave. This time the move didn't slow down for him. Overburn ripped the dilation away, snapping the world back to brutal normal speed. The rhythm didn't bother stretching time to help. It did something simpler. It stilled his mind. There was no future and no past, just the line of that blade and the knowledge of where he did not want it to be. Obsidian thrummed, not in arcs or paths, but in a single resonant note. Elias shifted his weight barely, half a footfall's worth, and let the blade pass so close that he actually felt, with skin and nerve, the heat ghost along the Iron Vulture's pitted chest. The mech's right hand was already moving. guided by instinct honed in dark alleys where knives had traced similar desperate paths. He caught Voss's saber wrist, not with a confident grip, but with a jarring clash of metal on metal, fingers biting into joints. For a heartbeat, both mechs locked there, teetering on the edge of total collapse. Their hulls touched, gold against rust, gleam against grime. The point of contact hummed, the twin systems wrestling not just for leverage, but existence. For a breath, a strange quiet settled between them. Kalen Voss felt it, though he did not understand its shape. A sense of standing at the edge of something vast and cold, staring into a darkness that did not care about rank or lineage. Elias felt it too. To him, the dark didn't feel indifferent. It felt interested. The architects, far away in no specific distance, observed a minor imbalance. Somewhere, one of them shifted attention a fraction, like a dreamer turning onto a different side. Threads nudged, almost imperceptibly. The Iron Vulture's fingers tightened. With a savage twist, Elias torqued Voss's wrist joint beyond its tolerance. Grease and microshards exploded in silent agony inside the connector. The remaining saber clattered to the arena floor, its blade sputtering, then dying amid a gasp from the stands. Disarmed, half-blind, thrusters dead, Voss's mech had nothing left but bulk. Elias stepped back one pace, letting the rhythm's last steady pulse align him. He didn't want to kill Voss. The Mandate might not care if a rust-born pilot butchered an elite cadet on their own arena floor, but he did. That blood would run down corridors he'd never see and pool eventually at Mira's bedside. So he chose a different line. No flourish, no grand finish. The Iron Vulture raised its rusted hand one last time and set its knuckles against the golden mech's central core hatch. Just there. He pushed. The hatch buckled inward. Power lines inside crumpled, shorting harmlessly against insulated casings. The override kicked in, as it was meant to in case of catastrophic failure, not humiliation. Voss's mech shut down. Lights dimmed along its frame, turning gold to dull dead orange. Limbs froze mid-reach. The mighty machine sagged forward, then sank carefully to the ground as failsafes engaged, lowering it to its knees, then to its haunches, then finally onto its side in the arena dust. Silence fell. Not immediately. The crowd noise took a breath's length to notice that it had no reason to continue. But once it did, it arrived not as absence, but as a thing in itself. Heavy, thick. It settled over the stadium like new smog. In that silence, the Iron Vulture stood alone. Its chest heaved with the residual motion of overtaxed pistons. Wisps of smoke curled from joint seams. The blue-black lattice that had briefly crawled across its armor, now dimmed, receding, as if some nocturnal creature tucked itself back into the cracks. Inside, Elias sat with his head tipped back against the seat, lungs dragging air in as if from a great distance. His ears rang with the echo of the rhythm, now fading, leaving ordinary heartbeat pounding loudly in its wake. He blinked, and the world shrank. The sharpness dulled, his senses folded back inside his own skin. The wide, tangled awareness that had included every bolt and cable retreated like a tide, leaving him with a body and a cockpit that suddenly felt too small. The sharpness dulled. Senses narrowed, retreating back inside his skin. The tangle of awareness that had included every bolt and cable withdrew like a tide, leaving a shore pitted with new, unexplained contours. The obsidian tendrils loosened. He felt them unhook from his neural ports with a strange, wet slipping sensation. The cold along his spine warmed to his own body's temperature. The shard beneath his clavicle thickened again, coiling in on itself, hardening once more into something small and deceptively inert. Then, pain caught up, furious at being kept waiting. His muscles quivered. His head throbbed with a too large ache, as if someone had tried to pour an ocean through a narrow pipe and left it cracked. The cut in his mouth from where he had bitten down earlier burned with each swallow of smoky air. But he was alive, and the golden mech, the symbol of everything he was not supposed to surpass, lay dismantled at his feet. The first sound that broke the stillness was not a cheer. A klaxon wailed, high and shrill, slicing through the arena like a blade. Security alert tones strobed red along the arena walls, out of sync with the dying combat alarms in Elias's cockpit. The clash of rhythms made the air feel wrong again, as if the world was stumbling to find a beat after the one they'd just shared. Mandate security units poured in through the ground-level gates, boots pounding in unison on the concrete. Their energy shields flared to life with a soft, menacing hum, casting pale blue halos on the dust. Some leveled rifles not at the crowd, not at the ruined golden mech, but squarely at the Iron Vulture. On the higher tiers, Academy officers rose from their seats, faces taut. In the sealed observation ring, a group of white-uniformed scientists slipped in through a side door, drawn by the earlier alerts. Their insignias bore the sigil of the Mandate's research branch, 3 concentric circles intersected by a single vertical slash. One of them, a narrow-faced woman with silver implants spidering from her eyes, stared at Elias's mech the way someone looks at a live grenade in a nursery. "Primal anomaly," she said, voice clipped. "Confirmed. Lock this down." The older proctor beside her glanced at the dying telemetry still trickling from Elias's unit. The patterns, if mirrored and overlaid, resembled something she had seen only once before, in redacted archives from a war that children were told had never happened. "Artifact resonance," she agreed, throat dry. "Priority containment." Inside the cockpit, Elias barely noticed the shift in the arena at first. Elias barely processed the shift outside at first. He stared at his open palms, gloves cracked and blackened, trying to understand how they could feel like his hands and someone else's weapon at the same time. The echo of the Iron Vulture's weight still sat in his joints. He flexed his fingers and half-expected sparks. Movement outside caught his eye. Through the fractured canopy, he saw security troops forming a perimeter around his mech, their shields knitting into a translucent barrier that curved skyward. The energy field's hum seeped through the hull, replacing the earlier note of the primal rhythm with a flat, low droning. His throat tightened. This wasn't how the trial was supposed to end. There should have been a voice calling rankings, points, maybe even his name. Pride, small, stupid, and badly placed, stirred in him. He'd done it. He'd beaten Kalen Voss. He'd won, and somehow that still wasn't enough. Some quirk of the Mandate's cruel design had let him flip the script, just for a breath. He looked down at the ruined console. Cracked gauges, dead holos, dangling wires twisted around his father's faded photo. A younger man in a cheap flight suit, still smiling around a fresh bruise on his jaw. The picture had survived. The charm hadn't. "Sorry," he whispered, unsure which of them he meant. A sharp knock reverberated through the cockpit canopy. "Pilot Elias Thorne," a voice barked through external speakers. "Power down and unseal your hatch now. Failure to comply will result in forced extraction and summary disciplinary measures under Mandate Code." The rest blurred into jargon that never meant anything good. As if he had a choice, Elias thought. As if he could keep the Iron Vulture standing 1 second longer, with or without their permission. He tried to shift his legs. Needles of pain jabbed up from his calves as feelings sputtered back. When he glanced down, he saw that a length of cable had coiled around his left shin during the chaos, pinning it at an odd angle. Bruises already mottled the visible skin between suit and boot. He took a breath and reached for the manual hatch release. The lever's paint had long since worn away. His fingers recognized its shape without needing to see. It resisted. For a moment, it felt as if something on the other side held it in place, one last grip of the strange power that had guided him. The obsidian under his skin gave a final, reluctant pulse, once like a heartbeat that did not belong to him. Then it let go. The lever slid down with a rough clank. Mechanisms groaned. Compressed seals hissed as the canopy's locks disengaged. With a sound like an old sigh, the cracked glass dome jerked upward. Cold arena air spilled in, thick with dust and the sharper ozone bite of active shields. Hands reached in almost before the hatch fully opened. Gloved fingers closed around his forearms, firm and impersonal. He flinched on instinct, but his body had nothing left with which to resist. Restraints clipped shut around his wrists with a metallic finality that echoed too loudly in his ears. "No sudden movements, pilot," someone said close to his helmet. The voice tried for neutral, but came out strained. Fear warped even authority. They unlatched his helmet with practiced efficiency. The seal broke with a soft pop, and cooler air kissed his sweat-damp hair. One of the troopers yanked the helmet off, blinking as he got his first look at the face inside. For a heartbeat, the trooper stared. Elias, blinking against the harsh floodlights, now trained directly into the cockpit, stared back. The world beyond the hatch was awash of white flares and dark shapes, security armor, officer cloaks, the faint suggestion of the crowd's faces beyond shield glass. His eyes watered.
"He's just a kid," the trooper muttered, too low for us to hear. An officer behind him snapped, "He's a Vector."
They half-lifted, half-dragged Elias out of the cockpit. As his boots left the battered footholds, something twisted softly in his chest. He had spent so many hours, days, folded into that space, that leaving it now felt like stepping out of his own ribcage. For a second, his foot slipped on the Iron Vulture's hull. The obsidian pulsed in reflex, a faint, cooling reassurance, helping his muscles remember balance. Then even that eased off, receding like a hand drawn back into the dark. They set him on the arena floor. His knees buckled. He might have fallen if the restraints at his wrists hadn't kept his arms hoisted, held by troopers on either side. His vision swam with the transition from cockpit shadow to raw stadium brightness. He heard the crowd again, not cheering, murmuring, low, jagged, like a hive that had just been kicked. Some voices whispered odds, frantic and greedy. Others wrapped old rust-born slurs around what they'd seen and found the words didn't quite fit anymore. Not cheering, murmuring, low and jagged, like a hive that had been struck. Some voices whispered numbers, odds recalculated in breathless tones. Others wrapped themselves around old slurs for Rustborn, trying and failing to make those words fit what they had just seen. Many, especially those in the lower ranks who smelled of oil and sector smoke, said nothing at all, their silence filled with a sharp, brittle thing that might have been hope. He found the Iron Vulture in his peripheral vision, slumped in place like an exhausted animal. Without him inside, it seemed smaller. The rusted plates sat at less defiant angles. The bullet-pocked canopy remained open, an empty eye. The blue-black lattices were gone. Only ordinary grime and scorch marks clung to its frame, telling no secrets. He wanted to reach out and touch it, palm flat on the old metal, to see if some echo of the rhythm answered. The restraints cut that thought off at the wrist. "Move," the officer said again. They began to haul him forward toward the nearest shield gate. The energy fields parted at a gesture from a security tech's gloved hand, the blue shimmer thinning just enough for them to slip through. As Elias passed under, the hairs along his arms rose, prickling at the contact with the field's static fringe. In the upper observation ring, Captain Ryland Shea watched with narrowed eyes, jaw tight enough to crack a tooth. Her uniform was immaculate, more so than usual. A small, nearly invisible twitch had started in the muscle near her left eye midway through the fight, and stubbornly refused to leave. She ignored it. Behind her, one of the researchers spoke in a low, fervent stream, data spilling from his lips, as if naming the readings could tame them. Non-standard energy signature peaked at 0.03 seconds before displacement event. Spatial distortion localized. No apparent external source. "This isn't an equipment fault, Captain. It's him." Ryland did not turn. "And the mech?" she asked. "Old rust coffin. No drive that could push a fold. There was some contamination, foreign material interacting with its systems." He hesitated. "Prime matter, maybe. We won't know until you cut it open," she finished for him, voice flat. "You'll have your medal, but you will remember protocol when handling mandate candidates." "That Rustborn isn't a candidate anymore," the silver-eyed scientist said. "He's a specimen." The word hung in the air between them, thin and hard. Ryland kept her gaze locked on Elias. From this height, with distance flattening their perspectives, he did not look like a threat. He looked like a young man whose knees kept threatening to fold, whose dark hair stuck damp to his forehead, whose eyes could not decide where to focus. On his mech, on the stunned crowd, or on some point none of them could see. From this height, distance flattened him. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a young man whose knees kept wanting to fold, whose dark hair stuck damp to his forehead, whose eyes couldn't decide where to land. On his mech, on the stunned crowd, or on some point none of them could see. Pilots who stepped between beats of space, engines that sang with their riders. Primal rhythm. "Whatever he is," she said quietly, "the mandate will own it." Below, Elias's foot caught on something half buried in the dust. He glanced down. Kalen Voss's mech lay on its side, inert. A squad of mechanics and medics swarmed around its open hatch, cutting through emergency bolts to pull the elite cadet out. For a fleeting moment, Elias saw Voss's face as they lifted him, pale with fury, eyes blown wide not with pain but disbelief. Their gazes met. Between them ran an invisible crack. It had started with rust and gold in combat, but now it sank deeper, into bone and command structures and histories. Neither had words for it yet, but both understood that people would talk about this day for a long time, that stories would grow in the crowded spaces of sector alleys and in the polished halls of the academy, each side shaping it toward their fears. The security troopers dragged Elias on. As he was taken through the gate and into the shadowed corridor beyond, the sounds of the arena dulled, then faded entirely. The last thing his eyes caught before the curve of the hallway stole the arena from sight was a patch of crowd, sector folk pressed against the railings, faces upturned. One figure stood out, a girl with a scarf pulled high over her mouth, eyes fever bright. She raised a fist, quick and small, before dropping it as a trooper's glare swept her way. He did not know her, but something inside him straightened at the sight, as if her small gesture had handed him a piece of meaning he'd nearly dropped in the smoke. The corridor smelled different from the arena, cleaner in a way that felt wrong, like the absence of something necessary. The walls gleamed with that particular mandate sheen, light catching in fine hairline cracks that pretended not to be there. Voices echoed ahead. Containment priority. We'll need isolation, dampening fields, full bioscan. Check for contamination spread. The last thing we need is artifact bleed in the cadet pool. And the family? Quarantine if necessary. Their sector is an infection vector now. Elias's heart lurched at that word. Mira. The image of her in Sector 4, hunched over the crackling soundbox, blanket clutched to her chest while she waited to hear his name, and hearing instead some clipped announcement about containment sent bile burning up his throat. He twisted in the trooper's grip, sudden and desperate. "Wait, my sister," he rasped. His voice sounded wrong, scraped raw by smoke and shock. "I did what you asked. I won, you said." A gloved hand shoved him forward between the shoulder blades. "Save it," one trooper muttered. "No one said anything about wanted." He stumbled, caught himself on nothing. The obsidian shard pressed cold against his chest, its presence a small, solid reminder that there was now something inside him the mandate feared enough to wrap in corridors and codes. They turned a corner, leaving the memory of the arena behind. The last tether to his old life, the iron vulture's silhouette against rust and dust, vanished from view. Ahead, the corridor yawed open into the blinding mouth of a decontamination bay, all white light and stainless restraint. Behind him, far back where sound crawled slower, the crowd in the stands began, finally, to speak, to repeat words like rustborn and impossible and did you see. Stories loosened themselves from fear and floated upward. Somewhere above, Lord Commander Veros received a data slate flagged urgent. He read the brief, face carved from stone, only a slight tightening around his eyes giving anything away. "Prime matter interaction," he said aloud, more to the empty office than to the aides hovering nearby. "On Earth, in my arena." He smiled, a small, cold thing that never reached his eyes. "Bring the boy to me," he said, in the decontamination bay's threshold, as the troopers propelled him forward, and the first wash of sterilizing light poured down on his skin like a mocking imitation of starlight. Elias clung to one thought with a grip fiercer than any restraint. Mira. If today had bought her even a single extra vial of medicine, a single day free from coughing herself bloody in a crate stacked under other crates, then the way the mandate looked at him now, with fear like knives, with hunger like gravity, might almost be worth it. Almost. The obsidian shard under his clavicle pulsed once, slow and deep, like a promise and a threat in a language he didn't yet speak.